Put your arms around 100-year-old tree. Climb up on a horse and let him run full speed. Take a look down at the world from 30,000 feet on your next flight. Watch a flock of birds against the morning sun. Close your eyes and listen to the river run. Catch a firefly in your hand, a raindrop on your tongue. That's right. There is a God. There is a God. There is a God. How much proof do you need? Plant a seed and see what comes out of the ground. Find the heartbeat on your baby's ultrasound. In a few years, hear it laughing. Don't it sound like a song? Stop and think about what you don't understand. Things like life and love and how the world began. Hear the doctor say he can't explain it, but the cancer is gone. There is a God. There is a God. There is a God. How much proof do you need? Does science say it's all just circumstance? Like this whole world's just an accident? But if you wanna shoot that theory down, look around. Just look around. There is a God. There is a God. There is a God. How much proof do you need? There is a God. There is a God. There is a God. How much proof do you need?
Hello everyone. Today we have the honor of being joined with us by Dr. Hugh Ross. And he is an astrophysicist and author. He is the senior scholar and founder of Reasons to Believe, an organization that researches and communicates how discoveries about nature harmonize with the words of the Bible. His books include The Creator and the Cosmos, Why the Universe is the Way It Is, Improbable Planet, and Designed to the Core. So thank you so much for giving me some of your time.
Oh, you're very welcome. My pleasure.
I actually recently purchased this book. It was recommended by the apologetics program at Biola. So I've had it on my bookshelf, and getting ready to prepare for this interview, I started reading the first few chapters, and I found it very easy to read. I wasn't expecting that, so I definitely recommend people get that book in particular. Can you give us a brief summary of your background and the work that you do?
Yeah, I was born, raised, and educated in Canada, and I was a nerd from the time I was a young child. Starting at age 7, I was reading 4 or 5 books on physics and astronomy a week. I knew that would be my future career. And when I was 16, it's when I came to the conclusion, based on my astronomy studies, the universe must have a beginning. If it has a beginning, there must be a cosmic beginner. So I went on a quest to find that cosmic beginner. But I was not raised in a Christian home. I didn't know Christians. I didn't know really where to look. So I decided, well, I'm going to look at the great philosophers. So I was reading Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason and writings of René Descartes and others, and discovered they had the wrong concepts of space and time. So then I went into the different religions of the world, looked at the Hindu Vedas, the Buddhist commentaries, the Quran, Zoroastrianism, looked at all the different isms, and consistently saw they got the science and the history wrong. But finally, I did pick up a Bible. And when I tell people I didn't get to know Christians, I got to see two from 30 feet away when I was 11 years of age. Two Gideons came into our public school. So I had a Gideon Bible, and at age 17, I began to go through that Gideon Bible and immediately realized how different this book was from the Hindu Vedas, the Buddhist commentaries, the Quran, and all the other books I picked up. It got the science right. It got the history right. And it wasn't written in vague, esoteric language. It was clear and direct. And I said, that's something I'd expect from the God that created the universe. And what really impressed me is how frequently the Bible predicted future scientific discoveries and future events in human history. So I was at age 19, after studying the Bible for 2 years, I signed my name in the back of the Gideon Bible, giving my life to Jesus Christ. But it took another 8 years before I met a serious Christian. That happened when I joined the faculty of Caltech, and I ran into a committed Christian astronomer there. He showed me how to find a Bible-believing church. I began to attend that church. 7 months later, they put me on the pastoral staff. I still serve on the pastoral staff of that church. And it was that church that helped me launch Reasons to Believe some 37 years ago.
Wow, that's great for you to receive support from the leadership to do something like that. That's great.
They basically said, we want you to take your message worldwide. And so they said, we're going to help you get this started.
That's so great. I can't imagine what it must be like to have a pastor that is a real science nerd or genius, whatever word you want to put there.
Well, I mean, the church where I pastor, I mean, we're between Caltech and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. We're only a few miles from the headquarters of the Skeptic Society. So I think we have an unusual congregation.
Wow, that's so interesting. So today we're actually going to be doing something a little differently. We will be talking about a song written by Chris Du Bois and Ashley Gorley. The song is entitled There Is a God. And when I heard that song on the radio with my kids in the background, I remember hearing a line that we'll be discussing, but it kind of gave the impression that science is over here and Christianity is over here. And so I thought it would be very interesting to speak to you about the evidence that we have through science that supports that Christianity is true. I would like to provide certain lyrics about the song throughout our discussion and just go from there and discuss the topic of science and Christianity. And if there's time, I'm hoping that we'll be able to also do a short Q&A with some of the questions you all submitted ahead of time. The singer recorded it is Lee Ann, I think her name is Womack, and she provides a lot of examples in her song about how nature is proof for believing that there is a God. So my question to you is, does science support the belief that the universe is evidence for an intelligent designer?
Well, I've written 5 books on the fine-tuned designs of the universe that make possible our existence in the universe. And you mentioned the creator and the cosmos, that's one of them. My latest one is Designed to the Core, that's number 5. And basically, I make the point, no matter where you look in the universe, whatever cosmic size scale you choose, whatever moment in the past history of the universe you look at, you will find overwhelming evidence that has been exquisitely fine-tuned to make our existence possible. And not just our existence, our redemption. I mean, the Bible tells us that God began his works of redemption before he created anything at all. That implies that everything that God creates is for the purpose of making possible the redemption of billions of human beings from their sin and evil. And that was the theme of Design to the Core, is that no matter what cosmic size scale you look at, you can make an overwhelming scientific case that it indeed has been designed to make possible the redemption of billions of humans from their sin and evil. So it doesn't just reveal there's a God, it reveals the character of that God and the plan that that God has for the universe and the human species.
That was something so interesting that I had never heard before, that you like discovered the character of God just by looking at like science, which is fascinating. So the chorus says, "There is a God, how much proof do you need?" There are some people that believe in God and they were convinced by scientific arguments, but yet at the same time there are other people that do not believe in God after listening to the same scientific arguments. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the Apostle Paul addresses that in Romans chapter 1, where he talks about how we human beings are born in rebellion against God. And because of our autonomy, we will engage in self-imposed ignorance. We know there's a God. We know it's been wonderfully designed to make our existence possible, and even our redemption possible. But that implies that there's a God there that's watching us, evaluating us. And there are people who don't like the idea that there's a God evaluating and judging how we live our lives. And so they choose to ignore what they know to be true, self-imposed ignorance. And as Romans 1 points out, they take the evidence for God and they impose that upon the creation. They worship the creation rather than the creator. That's a symptom of self-imposed ignorance.
You know, it's very common to hear people say that they don't accept it as evidence or proof. So is there maybe something else going on for why some people might feel that they can never have enough proof?
Well, I address the university audiences frequently, and I tell the skeptics in the audience, if you're not persuaded today, wait 1 month. Because literally every day, new scientific discoveries are being made that demonstrate the principle you see in Job and Psalms. That principle, the more we learn about nature, the more evidence we'll uncover for the supernatural handiwork of God. And in my fine-tuning books, I document that the evidence goes up by at least a factor of 1,000 times per month. Wait 1 month, the evidence will be 1,000 times stronger than it is today. And so, I mean, you studied apologetics. Where can you go in Christian apologetics and get 1,000 times more evidence in just 30 days? That's why you see in the history of the church that the fine-tuning argument for God's existence has been the number one go-to argument. It's because of the way we can accumulate that evidence with respect to time by studying the book of nature in more detail than we've already studied it.
For anyone that's not familiar with the fine-tuning term, would you be able to explain that in a simple way for anyone to be able to understand it? And also, can you go a little bit into how you have arrived to those numbers?
Sure. Well, take any characteristic of the universe, our galaxy, our star, our solar system, our planet, our moon, laws of physics, whatever. Take one feature out and say, how much can we change the value up or down and still have bacteria existing in the universe? How much can we tune it up and down and still have the equivalent of human beings? And what you discover is you, you can't push it up or down by hardly any at all. So, for example, 70% of our universe is dark energy. Change the value of dark energy by as little as 1 part in 10 to the 122nd power. There's no possibility for life anytime, anywhere in the universe. That's 122 zeros after the one, which is kind of mind boggling. But what I've done in some of my books is to give lay people an example. The best example we have of human engineering inventiveness and design achievement is about 1 part in 10 to the 26, which means that the one that designed dark energy so we can exist in the universe at a minimum is 10 to the 96 times more intelligent, more knowledgeable, more powerful, and more caring than we human beings. That's a factor of a trillion, 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 trillion times. And of all the gods of the religions of the world, only the God of the Bible manifests that level of intellect, knowledge, creativity, and power.
Wow. So did you actually do the math on the other gods of other religions?
Well, that's just one factor of the universe. I mean, you could do that for another 1,000 of them. I mean, that's what's amazing. There's hundreds of features of the universe where the level of fine-tuned designs is far superior to anything we human beings are capable of.
Wow. So the next line we can talk about says, stop and think about what you don't understand. Things like life and love and how the world began. My question to you is, how can Christians better think through and understand what scientific theories are not in conflict with the Bible, theories like the Big Bang Theory or evolution?
Yes, well, I mean, the Big Bang tells us there's a beginning to the universe. What impressed me, even before I gave my life to Jesus Christ, going through the Bible, we see dozens of passages that explicitly state three of the fundamental features of the Big Bang universe. And when I was in my teenage years, there was a steady state model, a hesitating universe model, the oscillating universe model for the universe, a quasi steady state model. All those models violated what the Bible clearly stated about the universe thousands of years ago. The Big Bang was the only one that was consistent with it. And today, we astronomers have an overwhelming scientific case telling us we do indeed live in a Big Bang universe. And what's interesting, if you look at the history of 20th century astronomy, it was astronomers who were atheists and agnostics who said, we have to get rid of this Big Bang. This Big Bang reveals that there is a beginning. It reveals that there is a God behind the universe. We got to get rid of this. But the more they tried to get rid of it, the more evidence they accumulated that it was true.
Wow. Do you know of any of those scientists who ended up becoming Christians? Or
I was one of them. When I was at Caltech, I shared an office with an Australian atheist astrophysicist. And it took him a year and a half, but he did give his life to Jesus Christ. And so I've had the pleasure of leading a number of astronomers to faith in Jesus Christ.
wow, that's amazing to hear. We hardly hear any stories of scientists coming to faith through science.
There's a lot of them. I mean, and what I find interesting too is that I speak in university campuses. It's the most prestigious scientific research campuses where I find the highest number of believers amongst the faculty. So it's places like Caltech, MIT, and Berkeley, where you find followers of Jesus Christ in the astronomy and physics department. Where I don't find so many is at the junior colleges. But at the institutions of highest academic achievement and research, I find a lot of believers. consistently 45% of research scientists believe in God and an afterlife. And you find a much higher percentage in the physical sciences than you do the life sciences.
For people that hesitate believing in God because of science, when the Big Bang Theory wasn't the popular one or the accepted one, would the science have led them to God at that point? Might they, have thought, well, I am holding a scientific worldview by not believing in God? So, is there an advantage to non believers now where the Big Bang Theory is acceptable compared to back then?
Yeah, the scientific case gets stronger with every year that goes by. It literally gets stronger with every day that goes by. I mean, one of the things I do at Reasons to Believe, I put out a weekly blog called Today's New Reason to Believe, where I just choose one scientific discovery from the scientific literature and then write an article for lay people saying, hey, we have an even stronger case than we had a week ago. However, I think that in some respects, it's more difficult for people living in the 21st century because for the first time in human history, the majority of us live in big metropolitan cities. And if you live in a big metropolitan city, the heavens don't declare much with the naked eye. I mean, Abraham could see 15,000 stars. Where I live in the Los Angeles basin, on a really clear night, maybe you can see 30 stars. But if you live in one of those big Asian cities, you don't see any stars at all. So the heavens aren't really declaring much at all. I tell you that there's a moon there and a sun there, but that's about it. So people living hundreds of years ago did have an advantage we don't have. And moreover, a lot of them were engaged with wildlife and wild nature, whereas so many people today are cut off from that. And so part of what I do at Reasons to Believe is just encourage people. There is a beautiful realm of nature out there. Go out and see it. And so on my Facebook page, I'll just post some of the photos I've taken where I've gone to places where I know humans haven't been in 50 years. Show them what the wildlife is like, what the scenic beauty is like. And because as I travel around the world, in the rural areas of the world, almost everybody believes in God. Where do the atheists live? In big cities where they're cut off from the book of nature. Now, the advantage we have today is we have these exploding scientific discoveries. And we've got the James Webb Space Telescope that's revealing us the beauty of the universe that we've never been able to see before. So, yes, we're not as in intimate contact with the wild world of nature that people were 200 years ago. But thanks to modern technology, we can see the handiwork of God like never before.
I was reading one of those first chapters on that book, and I just thought that. I thought, wow, he must have lived as a young boy somewhere where you can see the stars, because right here where I live, also in Los Angeles, I can't really see many stars at all. Like, I long to go somewhere where I can actually see like all the stars more clearly.
Well, if you live in the Los Angeles basin, you can go to a saddle point not far from Wrightwood, and there you can see the Milky Way with the naked eye. I take my telescope up there and set it up and let people see the heavens. And people will drive by in their cars and stop and look through my telescope. And it's amazing how they'll become spiritual as they look through the eyepiece. So when the Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God, that it declares the righteousness of God, it really does. And it's just a thrill for me to basically show people, hey, look through my telescope and just be in awe of what you see.
Yeah, it kind of goes with intuition. I know that there's some apologists that say that just people just look at something and intuitively it communicates something to them.
Well, why are flowers so beautiful? Why are there so many of them? Why such an incredible variety? God could have created the earth in such a way that all food looks and tastes like cardboard, but it doesn't. It has an incredible variety of color and texture and flavors. Our God is a God that enjoys beauty. He gave us a capacity to appreciate beauty. And so the beauty principle by itself argues for the God of the Bible.
Yes, I think the same thing about diversity in people. He could have made us all look the same, but he didn't.
Yeah,
Communicates.
could have made all of us look ugly, but he didn't do that.
um, so there are different scientists that disagree with each other. And do you believe that Christians are free to agree to disagree? Do you have any advice for Christians that some people might say maybe God did go about creating things through evolution, and others that think no, that's actually like a bad thing for you to believe as a Christian?
Well, what I find unique about Christianity is that it tolerates diversity, tolerates diversity of opinion. We agree on the fundamentals of the Christian faith, but we're free to disagree and everything else. And that's why you see all these different denominations in Christianity. What's unique about Christianity, it encourages a free market exchange of ideas. You don't see that in Islam or Hinduism. I mean, it's basically forcing people to believe a certain way. Now, it does tell us, particularly in the New Testament, although we're free to disagree, we're to disagree in a spirit of charity and respect and gentleness. Jesus said, they'll know you're my disciples because of your love for one another. So it's important how we disagree. And unfortunately, that's not always manifested in the Christian community, but that's something we had reasons to believe are committed to do. I mean, we have the enormous community of scholars from all over the world, but the condition to join our scholar community, we want you to be humble, bold about your faith, but manifest the characteristics of gentleness and respect. You can't do that, we don't want you in our community because we think it's so important that you have the demeanor of Christ as much as it's physically possible in this world.
I'm glad to hear that. The next line says, hear the doctor say he can't explain it, but the cancer is gone. So now we're moving more into the category of does science fail to explain phenomena like documented miracles? And I wanted to share with you that along the way of hearing different apologists talk about fine-tuning, I was able one night, I felt very desperate. I had this ringing in both of my ears for weeks. I wasn't getting sleep. I was in such a desperate situation. I couldn't sleep too well, so I prayed for God to heal me. And I had gone to specialists to tell me that what the reason for the ringing was. And he said, go get some x-rays from your dentist. I'm pretty sure it's because you have impacted wisdom teeth. And so I came back with the x-rays. It was that. He said, go get those removed. And I think he saw that I was questioning him because he's like, I've been doing this for so long. I know that this is it. This is the reason. I didn't want to do it because I had my little children at the time. And I was like, who's going to take care of them in case I have an adverse reaction? So on that night, I started to think about how God created everything so precisely that if anything was out of place by a tiny little measurement, that it wouldn't be possible. So I asked God, can you move my teeth ever so slightly so that I don't have this problem anymore? Just thinking about that apologetics argument and just thinking about God and having faith in that ability of his. And I heard the noise slow down on that moment. And I was just shocked. I was surprised. I had faith that he could do it, but I wasn't necessarily expecting him to do it. And I've always just been amazed at how God can use even an apologetic argument in such a practical situation that I experienced. So, would you have anything to talk about when it comes to that, like how science and miracles interact, what the limitations of science is, and so forth?
Well, I've run into a lot of unbelieving scientists who say, look, I'm a scientist. There are no miracles. I say, well, what do you do with the space-time theorems? The space-time theorems prove not only does the universe have a beginning, but space and time have a beginning, which implies there must be an agent outside of space and time that created our universe of matter, energy, space, and time. As a scientist, can you think of any greater miracle than that? And they all admit, no, we can't think of any greater miracle than bring into existence the entirety of physical reality. So if there's a God that can bring into existence the entirety of physical reality, he can take care of your wisdom teeth. He can do anything he wants. And what amazes me about the God of the Bible, he not only performs these miracles on very grand scales, he wants to have a relationship with every one of us human beings and work in our lives so we're experiencing miracles on a regular basis. I mean, I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Always Be Ready. It's based on 1 Peter 3:15. If you will prepare good reasons for your faith and hope in Jesus Christ and are able to share those reasons with gentleness and respect, you'll personally see God doing miracles to bring people to you that in advance he is prepared to hear and respond to those reasons. And the first 4 or 5 times it happens, you'll think, well, maybe that's a coincidence. But when it happens over 100 times, you realize this is God's Holy Spirit working miracles in my life and the life of the people he brings to me, just like he did in the book of Acts. And I remember studying the book of Acts even when I wasn't yet a believer. And I realized the book has no conclusion. It just ends midstream. But that implies that the book of Acts is not over. Now, all the miracles you see in the book of Acts, God intends to do that in the lives of Christians throughout all of the history of the church. But it comes with a condition. You need to be committed to share the good reasons for your hope, faith, and hope in Jesus Christ. You need to be part of bringing people to faith in Jesus Christ. And if you will do that, you'll experience these miracles. The other promise we get for miracles is out of James 5. It says, if any of you are sick or ill, call for the elders, have them pray for you, and you'll be healed. But it comes with a condition. Confess your sins to the elders. And it's making the point that so many of our physical ailments have a spiritual root. And we call for the elders. And, we do this in our church, where we tell people to come to us. Will you give us permission to pray for your illness prophetically? They say, what do you mean? We're going to ask the Holy Spirit to expose sins in your life that you're not aware of, that we're not aware of, because there may be a link between that spiritual problem and the physical ailment that you're experiencing. That's another reason why you call for the elders. You want to call for people that you trust as spiritual leaders, because it's quite intimidating and exposing to actually have your sins being publicly revealed that you don't even know about. But I've been in a number of those prayer sessions where instead of the sins of the person coming to us for prayer get exposed, secret sins of one of the elders gets exposed. And so the person that comes to us doesn't get healed, but one of the elders gets healed. And the whole point is, yes, God wants to heal us physically, but he's far more concerned to heal us spiritually. And the two go together. So yeah, as a scientist and as a pastor, I believe in miracles, but I also believe God has put conditions on how we need to live our lives so we can experience those miracles.
Do you have something that, like an answer for what you believe the use of science is?
Well, science tells us that there is a God out there who has performed miracles, is caring and loving enough to perform miracles on us as individual human beings. You know, the core of Christianity, it's a transcendent God, so big and powerful, he's able to operate completely independent of the entirety of the universe and all of its physics and dimensions. As it tells us in Jeremiah, it's a God that exists everywhere within the universe, operates everywhere in the universe. No matter where we go in the universe, God is there. And that God is closer to us than any one of us are to one another. And so it's an intimate God. And so when I'm speaking to people in the church, I say, look how close you're sitting together. Are you aware that God is physically closer to you than you are to one another? And kind of do a demonstration. Hey, God's not constrained to our four space-time dimensions. And I show them, hey, just bring up even one extra dimension of space. You can have God physically closer to you than you are to one another, yet you can't see him and you can't touch him. It's a God that's both transcendent and immanent.
Wow. So, and it's interesting to think of science from like a Christian perspective, where God is the one that gives man knowledge in the first place to be able to discover all these things and to do all of these inventions. And so it seems like God is, through science, is bringing man closer to him with this knowledge. But at the same time, like you said, we're free agents, so we can choose what we do with science. And for some people, they use science to get apart from God.
Well, the definition for faith that you see in the Bible is knowing the truth and acting upon it. And I know a lot of scientists that know the truth, but they refuse to act on what they know to be true. And I also know a lot of people who think they know what is true and act in very foolish ways. Faith has got two components: establish what is true and act upon what you've proven to be true. The Apostle Paul put it this way: test everything, hold on to that which is good.
Yes. The next line says, science says it's all just circumstance, like this whole world's just an accident, but if you want to shoot that theory down, look around. Does all of science unanimously argue for circumstance?
Well, I've been speaking on the fine-tuning evidence for God since the 1970s. In the 1980s, I told university audiences, eventually the fine-tuned argument for God will become so pervasive and so overwhelming that atheists will have nowhere else to go but to argue it's just circumstance, it's just pure chance. Don't be surprised if they start speculating. There's an infinite number of universes, all different from one another, and we live in the one universe by pure chance. It's not God, it's just pure chance. Well, it took another 20 years, but starting in about the year 2000, that's exactly where atheists went. They call it the multiverse, an infinite number of universes where they're all different from one another. But a really famous atheist physicist, Leonard Susskind, said, we've got to stop using the multiverse. It's a bad argument. It explains everything. And an argument that explains everything explains nothing. And the book, The Creator and the Cosmos, fourth edition that you held up earlier, you'll see 6 pages in there on the multiverse. But I give you an analogy to make Leonard Susskind's point. If you've got an infinite number of universes, and the thing about infinity, it's not just infinity. Infinity plus infinity equals infinity. Infinity times infinity equals infinity. So if you've got an infinite number of universes, they're all different from one another, you'll have an infinite number of planets, just like planet Earth. And an infinite number of planet Earths, you're going to have an infinite variety of birch tree species. And birch trees peel thin white pieces of bark. But if you got an infinite variety of birch tree species, one of those species, by pure chance, will peel thin white pieces of bark that are perfectly rectangular and measure 8.5 by 11 inches. And these pieces of bark will fall on soils with random chemicals in them that'll imprint on those pieces of bark every equation, every photograph, every table, every paragraph, every equation, and every scientific research paper that's ever been published. So those tens of millions of scientific research papers did not come from the minds of scientists. The multiverse did it. So you're basically demonstrating the philosophical flaw in appealing to an infinite number of universes. If you're going to use that to get rid of God's design, it simultaneously eliminates the case for any human designs. And nobody lives their lives that way. So you're basically showing the philosophical flaw in appealing. In fact, I would put it this way: anytime you appeal to an infinity, you're in a philosophical trap.
I think in your book you were talking about how it's important to not be a snob, and to see the use of, I think you said theology, philosophy, and science.
Yes.
You believe in like a holistic use of all of those things?
Well, the problem of the 21st century, those of us who've got terminal degrees, a PhD, we specialize. You have to specialize to be competitive. And so I don't think it's an accident that philosophers think we're the kings and that science doesn't matter, theology, philosophy is the way to go. And you run into theologians and they'll say, well, theology is the queen of the sciences. And so they see theology as being supreme. But probably the most egregious example of that will be scientists who will dismiss philosophy, they dismiss theology, and they say, all we need is science. Well, the truth of the matter is we need all three. And I also would say to theologians, don't just be an expert in one book of the Bible. You need to integrate all 66 books of the Bible. And so I'll say to my evolutionary biologist friends, don't just be an expert in the fossil record and genetics, because the physics of the sun is a huge factor in understanding the history of life on planet Earth. And they're always stunned when I say that. They say, what has the sun got to do with it? I said, well, the biggest mistake Charles Darwin made, he assumed that the sun's luminosity never changes. We know it changes. It changes dramatically. And only a mind that knows the future physics of the sun will know what life to have on planet Earth, at what time, in what diversity, and what abundance. A naturalistic mechanism would quickly fall into sync. And so to explain the long history of life on planet Earth, you need the mind of the God of the Bible.
I think we went over the whole song now. Is there? I know you've been giving us reasons all this time, but is there anything else you would want to add for why you would believe it's more reasonable to believe in an intelligent designer rather than circumstance?
Well, we've written books on the origin of life, the history of life, the origin of humanity, basically making the point the more we learn about human origins and the origin of life, the more impossible it becomes to explain that from a naturalistic perspective. And so what we do at Reasons to Believe is we put the non-theistic models side by side with the creation models and say, as we learn more and more, what happens to the anomalies? All models have anomalies, things that don't seem to fit. If the anomalies get bigger and bigger and more problematic, you got the wrong model. But if the anomalies get smaller and smaller and less problematic, you probably got the right model. And so we document in our books, when you scientifically test competing models side by side, it shows you the pathway to truth.
Wow, I'm so looking forward to reading all of your books in the future. Definitely, science was always something that I wasn't very sure about, even as I attended my public school as a teenager. And when the topic of evolution came up, I didn't know how to process things as a Christian. So I'm definitely excited to learn more about.
Rest assured, we have a translation team at Reasons to Believe. we actually have more editors than we have scientists. And the job of those editors is to take the complex science that we scientists think everybody understands, and they translate it for people who don't have a science background. But they also let us put in hundreds of footnotes and endnotes in the book so the people with the education can say, hey, I want to put Dr. Ross's claims to the test. We actually give them links to the scientific research papers so they can check it out for themselves. But most people that have a science background, they're saying, hey, I'm going to let that go. I'm just going to read the text.
I appreciate that. A lot of Christian apologists are starting to, or maybe they always have. I'm kind of new to this, so, but I'm noticing that usually in the beginning of their books, they say thank you to this lady and this lady. Usually, I see it's women that are helping to with the actual editing of the book and make it more readable. And so I really appreciate that. And I also noticed when you were talking about your childhood, how you invited, you took your telescope from your backyard, I think you said, and then you brought it to the front so that other people could see it too. And I just thought, wow, that speaks a lot about this young boy's heart, that he didn't just want to keep it all to himself. He wasn't necessarily interested in just being respected as this really smart person in this life, but you actually wanted to bring others into this, whatever you were learning and seeing. So I think that your ministry shows that you continue to have that same heart, and you desire to make this information accessible to us as well.
Well, it's great fun for me. It's a great thrill for me. I want other people who don't have a scientific or a theological background to experience that same joy and thrill in making discoveries in the book of scripture and the book of nature. It's fun. I want everybody to enjoy that.
Yeah. So we have a few minutes left. Can we do the Q&A real
Okay.
quick?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll start with the first one here. And this person, Sarita Krishna, has two questions. So they're sort of related. The first one is, what evidence do we have that Jesus actually lived, died, and resurrected? And the next one is, what evidence is there to authenticate the books of the Bible? And I had someone respond saying something like, any evidence that science could back to validate Christianity would have to include some of the miracle stories recorded in the Bible, evidence for a flood, the parting of the Red Sea, the walls of Jericho falling down, the resurrection of Christ, those kinds of stories. So would you agree with Lisa Quintana, who said that would be how a scientist might approach these questions, like what evidence do we have for the resurrection of Jesus and the authentication of the books of the Bible?
Well, one discipline of science is archaeology. And so archaeologists have been doing digs in the area of Israel and around there and verifying that the historical accounts of the Bible, in fact, are accurate. That there really was a person, Jesus, who lived back then. And a lot of the miracles described in the Old Testament, archaeologists have been able to confirm that there was this city of David, there was this king Solomon in all of his glory. So we can actually trust. I mean, a common saying in archaeology, every time an archaeologist puts a spade into the dirt, they affirm another historical statement that's in the Bible. And archaeologists have never been able to disprove any of the historical statements in the Bible. And I notice part of that question is, how can we trust the books of the Bible? Well, what's unique about the Bible compared to other religions, we have actual physical manuscripts that date very early to the time at which the books are claimed to be written. So, for example, we have a fragment from the Gospel of John that dates to 119 AD. And he was writing in the latter part of the 90s AD. So that's less than a generation separated from the time he was actually writing. And that's true the other books of the Bible too. I mean, it used to be that the earliest manuscript we had of the Old Testament was 9th century AD until they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. which dates to the 2nd century BC. And they've either found entire books like the entire book of Isaiah or portions of the other books of the Old Testament. But in each case, we see that what we have in the 2nd century BC is identical to what we had in the 9th century AD. 11 centuries and not any significant distortion. I mean, there's only 40 words that people question out of everything in the Old Testament. And none of those words have any significant bearing on the teaching of the Old Testament. So that's one thing that Christianity's got going for, is a wealth of documentary evidence. I mean, in terms of the New Testament, we've got 16,000 manuscripts of the New Testament that date before the 5th century AD, some of them going back as early as the 2nd and 3rd century AD. And no other religion has that wealth of documentary evidence. Just to give you an idea about the resurrection, there was 3 lawyers living in the mid part of the 19th century who were all atheists. They decided to put the historical case for the resurrection of Jesus from the dead on trial. And they wound up writing a book concluding that the historical evidence for the bodily resurrection of Jesus from the dead was stronger than the historical evidence that Napoleon had been defeated at Waterloo. And those 3 lawyers were all alive at the time that Napoleon was defeated at Waterloo. So it's like, and they all became Christians as a result. They started off as atheists and became Christians.
Wow. Is there anything you would add about the process of carbon dating?
Well, carbon dating is a radiometric dating tool. And like all radiometric dating tools, it's very reliable when it's used within about a factor of 7 of its half-life. A half-life of carbon-14 is 5,715 years. So multiply that by 7 and divide that by 7. That's the range of dates where carbon-14 will give you accurate dates. So we've been able to use carbon-14 dating to date Bible manuscripts to an accuracy of plus or minus 9 months. On the other hand, if you're trying to date something that's only 500 years old, carbon-14 will not give you a reliable date. Or if you're trying to date something that's 50,000 years old, it will not give you a reliable date. And hey, it only works on something that's carbon-based and something that was once alive. So it works great for dating a papyrus manuscript. It'll tell you how long that piece of papyrus has been dead. It's great for dating a human skeleton. It'll tell you how long those bones have been dead. But that's a condition. It's only effective for something that was once alive and something that's carbon-based.
Is that the same as radiometric dating?
Yeah, I mean, we have many radiometric dating tools. You've got uranium dating, thorium dating, potassium dating, but in each case, they have a range where they're reliable and a big range where they're not reliable. So uranium dating is a very powerful tool for dating the age of the Earth because its half-life is 4.4 billion years. So that's really right on target for dating the Earth. Thorium is great for dating the universe. Its half-life is 14.1 billion. So again, the rule of thumb is, what's the half-life of the radiometric tool, and what are you trying to date?
So Slick Rick is asking about radiometric dating and if it's possible that shortcomings of that measurement will surface over time.
While radiometric dating tools are based on the assumption that the laws of physics have not changed, the Bible tells us of multiple places there's been no change in the laws of physics. And we astronomers routinely measure the laws of physics in the past every time we look at a star or a galaxy. So for example, we look at the Andromeda galaxy, it's 2.5 million light years away. So our measurements tell us what the laws of physics were 2.5 million years ago. And they're identical to what we measure in the lab here on Earth. So astronomy tells us there's been no change in the laws of physics. The Bible tells us there's been no change in the laws of physics, which means the radiometric dating methods will give us reliable dates. Again, with the proviso that you use it within the right date range and you use it on the right sample. We'll also have to assume that the sample is pure. If you've got a sample with a mixture of material in it that's all over the map in terms of its age, then you're not going to get a reliable radiometric date. So, for example, when they date these Grecian urns by carbon 14, you've got the papyrus urn, you've got a limestone crust on it. And so you wonder why they put three dates in the scientific literature. One date is for the papyrus, one date's for the limestone crust, the third date is for the average, where you got material where you can't separate the limestone from the papyrus. The dates aren't contradictory, they're dating three different things in the same sample.
Okay. On that topic, Joel Suraj is asking about the age of the Earth.
Yeah, well, with the age of the Earth, we can use thorium-232, uranium-238, and uranium-235. And all three decay into three different daughter products, lead-208, lead-207, lead-206. So we can take ancient material and use six different tools, the quantities of the lead isotopes, the quantity of uranium and thorium in the three different forms. And that's why we get such a high precision date for the age of the Earth. 4.5662 billion years ago, plus or minus 0.0001 billion. So we actually can measure it to 4 places of the decimal.
So there's a lot of debate going on that topic. So from a scientist perspective, you don't hold to the what is it?
The young Earth view.
Yes.
While I do agree with my young Earth creationist friends that we humans are recent, we've only been here for thousands of years, but that the universe and the Earth are billions of years old. And if you look at the creation days in Genesis 1, there's plenty of textual evidence that tells you those creation days are 6 consecutive long periods of time. So there's no conflict between the biblical date and the dates we get from geology and astronomy. I mean, notice there's no evening and morning for the 7th day. That evening morning phrase tells you each day has a definite start time and a definite end time. We see that for the first 6 days, but there's no evening and morning for the 7th day, which means it's not yet finished. Psalm 95 and Hebrews 4 both explicitly tell us we're still in God's 7th day. And when I saw that in the Bible at age 17, it answered the fossil record enigma for me. Why we see so many new phyla and classes and orders and families before humanity, and we see nothing new after humanity. For 6 days, God creates. On the 7th day, he stopped creating. It also explains to me why so many biologists say we see no evidence scientifically for the handiwork of God, because the vast majority of them are doing their research in the human era. That's the era when God stops from performing creation miracles. So I tell my biologist friends, well, of course, you're looking on the wrong day. Look before humanity, you'll see an overwhelming case. But if all you do is focus on the human era, you're not going to find any scientific evidence.
So interesting. Thank you for sharing that. When you said that we are fairly new, just out of curiosity, it's because I homeschool my kids, and they are introduced to these topics already. My kids are in 2nd and 3rd grade, and so there's books that talk about how old the universe is, but they also talk about what would you call them? They're not people yet. They're like
Or you talking about Neanderthals,
Yeah.
Homo erectus, the Australopithecines.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Those are bipedal primate species that God created. And I just finished writing a chapter for another book making the point that the latest evidence tells us the population levels of Neanderthals and Homo erectus were quite low. We're talking a maximum of 15,000 individuals at any given time, and probably no more than 8,000. With population levels that low, they will go extinct before they evolve. And we see that in the fossil record. We look at the fossil skeletons, we see no change over the time that they've been here on Earth, and they've gone extinct. So this is evidence for God supernaturally creating these species. And one of our books, two of our books actually, we've written what we think is the reason why God would create those species. Because what you notice is North America, South America, and Australia, we have no evidence for those species existing. And when humans went into Australia, they quickly drove to extinction 94% of all the large-bodied bird and mammal species that existed there. And hence the Aborigines in Australia were never able to get out of the Stone Age or develop a large population. They killed off all the animals they needed. All the camels were gone, all the horses were gone, all the cows were gone. But that didn't happen in sub-Saharan Africa. There, the extinction rate was only 4% as opposed to 94%. Sub-Saharan Africa had 11 successive species of bipedal primates, and all of them were bipedal. All of them had the capability of using pieces of wood and stones to hunt prey, and it basically taught the large-bodied bird and mammal species, if you see a tall bipedal with rocks and sticks in their hands, run away. And so those animals survived in Asia, Europe, and Africa. They did not survive in North and South America and Australia. And so I believe that God purposely created a sequence of species of bipedal primates, basically to train the large-bodied bird and mammals. Hey, a super predator is coming. If you want to survive, run away. Don't run towards.
Wow, that's fascinating. So Derek Beeler is asking, is the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem supported among relevant academics, even secular or atheistic ones? Are there any competing theorems or objections to it? If so, what are they and how would he respond to them?
Well, that's all covered in the fourth edition of The Crater and the Cosmos. And he's referring to the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin space-time theorem. We now have about 30 space-time theorems. That theorem is the most famous of the space-time theorems because it basically states any model of the universe where the universe expands over its history must have a space-time beginning. And that would include the full panoply of hot Big Bang inflation models. They're all subject to the conclusions of this theorem that says there's a beginning to space and time. Now, since that theorem has been published, there have been atheist astrophysicists who said, I think we can come up with an alternative. But what they have to do is appeal to an extremely early era in the history of the universe, when the universe was younger than 10 to the minus 43 seconds. And that's when you got the possibility that quantum mechanics can play just as big a role in the dynamics of the universe as gravity does. And so there's a Caltech theoretical physicist, Sean Carroll, who's produced what he called the quantum eternity theorem for the universe. On the other hand, there's a Christian theoretical physicist, Aaron Wall, that I cite in The Crater and the Cosmos, who says, well, your theorem only works if the quantum space-time fluctuations in that era are really big. If they're actually subject to the laws of thermodynamics, they won't be big enough to escape the conclusions of the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem. And what I added in The Crater and the Cosmos is that if those quantum space-time fluctuations are big, they actually get magnified as we look at the light of distant quasars and blazars as they travel through space towards our telescope. It would predict that the images of these distant quasars and blazars would get blurry. They get blurrier and blurrier as they travel through space, and the blurriness increases as you shorten the wavelength. All the observations we astronomers have made tell us they're not blurry. They remain sharp at all the wavelengths we observe and at all the distances. Now, the distance limit so far only goes out to 4 billion light years. With the James Webb Space Telescope, we're going to be able to push that out to 13 billion light years. So we're going to be able to put that to a more rigorous test. But it's already such that the range of speculation to avoid the space-time theorems has gotten incredibly tiny. But as I point out, you can never eliminate all the speculation. But you'll find a chapter in the Creator and the Cosmos titled Non-Empirical Arguments for Atheism. And the drama of that chapter is atheists have got nowhere else to go but to feel the things we don't know and can't test or measure. Everything we know and test and measure screams that there's a God beyond space and time that created everything.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you so much for answering all of our questions. Where can people learn more about your work, and what resources would you recommend for anyone that wants to go deeper into this topic?
Well, our website is reasons.org. You can spend months diving through all the thousands of articles and video clips that are there. They can go to reasons.org/Ross. That's a portal to get free chapters of my books. Anyone wants a free chapter, they can get it at reasons.org/Ross.
Okay, thank you so much again for your time, for being here with us
It's
today.
been my pleasure. Thank you for your questions.
Try